highly desirable.
On TV. That is,
I've been on TV.
yeah, that's what I.
Where's the
Welcome, everybody. Let's get us started. Dave, did you steal my clicker? You got to watch this. Yeah, I promise I'll give it back. So, welcome. This is a pretty full house tonight. I don't know if it has anything to do with our speaker, but so letting you know the usual. The club room was open at 6:30 tonight. I brought in this really wide variety of cookies. I don't know how many are left. I see a few left out there. So come early, hang around with people, get to know your existing friends and your older friends better. This is the last night for my name badge sign up. So I'm going to be ordering these next week. So don't come to me next Friday and say you want a badge. I'll throw something at you. So right now, you notice Bob and Mike are not here because they are at the opening of their gallery in Westlake. I messed up my own personal calendar and went out and saw it. They had just hung it, and so it's really worth seeing. It's the Farrell Center, and it's not huge, but they've just got a lot of really great pieces there. You'll recognize a lot of Bob's and all of his wonderful just landscape work, and of course, Mike works for the Park Service, so he's got a lot of those kinds of images. That's going to be up, I think, for about 6 weeks, as I understand it. So tomorrow, and this is a little unusual, tomorrow we're doing a field trip, and you can actually register right now. You can still register. Registration's open because we're not taking money online. You need to pay $20 donation at the site. But this is supposed to be a peak time to get that at 8:30 in the morning. The sunlight's supposed to be coming through. I hear that Kim ordered for some sunshine, so we'll see if that pans out. And then a week from tonight is our last, and I'm going to be saying last a lot, it's our last creative pictorial competition. So those of you who might be new members, the reason it's last is we don't go on a calendar year. Our club year goes from June 1st to May 31st. So we're approaching the end of our competition year before the end of year awards and all that. So this deadline is already closed for this. It will be projection. And then we have our last photojournalism. It's not a competition. You can submit up to 7 images. You have to do it through Shutterscore, and the deadline for that is the Wednesday before. So you've got a little time to work with other than a normal competition. And it is not a competition, but you can enter images. There will be an image on the back wall that wins photojournalism image for the year. So not a competition, but you still can get on the back wall with a good image. And then the last, bee competition. And, you know, bee competitions have been going pretty good. And I really encourage people, it is like the gateway into competing. It's a little maybe distressing, you know, because you're like, I'm afraid that people are going to say bad things about my image. What we've added to this is Richard Ader is going to do some light editing, kind of do a critique of your images. And this is the only competition we've got where it's basically wide open. In other words, it doesn't matter what category you're in. It's in a totally pictorial category. And you can do editing and AI as long as the image is basically your image and not all constructed AI. So I encourage you to not only to get in and involved with the bee competition, but those who are beyond bee to come in and support them, because it's a little scary sometimes. And then we had last Tuesday was a mat cutting. We're going to have one more March 17th, and then we'll be closed down for that until September. So I'm going to make the last pitch. I keep making this pitch. There is a rack by the refrigerator of these clothes. The prices are insanely cheap. And you're going to see that when you go to buy a new one, because the board does not make any kind of a profit on the new stuff that's going to be coming in. I mean, we're talking cents, a penny on the dollar, maybe, if it just depends on where if it's costing us $49.90, we'll probably charge $50. But they're going to be expensive because what's back there was dropped down by half and then dropped down by another third. So I know the popular sizes are gone. The big sizes for me, those are gone, but for the most part. But you might have a child or grandchild that could fit into some of this and promote our club, right? Okay, it's prize time. So I have to pick my victims, and I've already decided this is the hardest part of what I do. I've already decided on my victims. I'm going to pick Wayne, who's back come on up, Wayne, who hasn't been here for a while. And I'm going to pick past presidents. Do we have any past presidents in the room? The two of you get up here. So, I don't count Richard. No, wait, I only need three, Richard. No, seriously, Richard, I only need three people. He's sorry to embarrass you. You get a prize, okay? You can guys stand over here. Well, I tell you what I usually do is I let the don't pick it up. No, ladies go first. Now you haven't heard this before because you haven't been here for a while. There's questionable utility for this stuff, but what's here tonight, two of them, not the one that somebody already showed us. Dave Busch could probably tell you. Dave Busch, you're the one that matters. Dave Busch will be able to help you with it. So, ladies first, take a pick. Okay.
Look at it now.
Now you can have it. This is a cool. See, it's a lens. It is a. You have to unzip it. It is a. No, it's not a lens, baby. Be careful with it because it might slide out. If you pull it out, it is actually a fisheye. Yeah.
Oh my, where's Ron Skinner?
Yeah. If you pull that cap off, I think you'll see it's a fisheye. Yeah. Isn't it? And there's some adapters. Don't ask me what they're there for, but our resident expert here can, I'm putting him on the spot, but I don't think there's a lens or a camera that Dave Busch hasn't touched if it's coming out in the last 20 years. So that's yours. We'll go with Wayne. Take a pick. You saw what that was? It is lens caps with a little string. So those of you who lose them, yeah, don't know if they'll fit any of the lenses you've got. And Dave, you get to pick the last one. Just lift it up. Careful. It is another lens. This one is a, what is it, like an 80 to 210. Some of the old lenses do really good. So you can both check with David and see what he has to tell you after the meeting as far as utility there. He doesn't know. I love putting David on the spot. Okay, you guys are good to go? Oh. Okay, let me get, in the way of introduction, which by the looks of the number of people here doesn't need an introduction very much, but Dave Busch, who has been doing our special interest groups for years, is our presenter tonight, and it's a really interesting topic on the myths that we all believe about photography. Let me pull his presentation up here, and we'll be good to go. Okay, Dave. It is all yours as promised. Clicker back.
Yeah. All right. Well, can you hear me first? All right, too bad. Thank everybody for coming. I see some new faces. I see some people that I haven't seen for a while. But I'm here tonight partially because I've been, like Chris says, I've been doing this first Thursday of the month thing for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. I asked if anybody could hear me. Yeah. Well, if it's off and they can hear me, who cares? I mean, all right. Yeah, I've been doing this first Thursday of the month thing for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. And it's sort of evolved over time. I originally started it because most of the presentations that the club gives are very general. They apply equally to everybody's camera. It doesn't matter which camera you have. You come to one of the classes, you come to one of the presentations. It applies. I thought, since I specialize in individual camera types, Kodak, Sony and Nikon and so forth, that it would be nice to have something where people, all the Nikon users could get together, Canon people could get together, Sony people, Olympus, Pentax, whatever, Fuji, and we'd do a little presentation, and then we'd break up into groups. And we had it for a while. We'd have we had some Nikon experts and Canon experts and Sony experts, and we'd break up into groups, meet in different rooms, and everybody would solve common problems, discuss what they were doing. How do you do this? How do you do back button focus with a Canon? That sort of thing. And the presentation was pretty much just a way of getting everybody to come and kicking off an individual topic, and then we discuss it later. First couple of years, I was just the host. I'd go off on vacation somewhere, and Coleman would host one month, and Steve Luxick would host another, and that was the focus of the thing. Over the years, it started to change, and the focus became more and more on, what my presentation was. Last couple years, at the end of each night's presentation, we decided, well, what are we going to do next month? And we'd pick a topic that everybody wanted to talk about. I'd do a presentation. Problem is, it's getting harder and harder to come up with topics that people want to talk about. Last December was probably it was a little disappointing. This is I showed up. I won't mention what the topic was, but there wasn't a lot of interest. We actually had 8 people. I spent 16 hours making the presentation, and people come and they want to learn things, ask questions. Well, for 8 people in 16 hours, it would have been more efficient if I would have spent 2 hours with each person individually, answering their questions. And so I thought, well, I'm going to come on a Friday night and see what is it that people want. If they're going to come, apparently they were coming to hear me talk about stuff. So I thought, well, I'll come on a Friday night. Maybe I can ask people to, what would you want to talk about on Thursdays? Why would you come? Also to find out, are there people who would come if it was a different night? Is Thursday a bad night? First Thursday of the month a bad night? That sort of thing. But these are some of the topics we've covered in the past. I don't know if you can see those from the cheap suits in the back. But since we've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, we've repeated some of these several times. The shooting concerts, birds in flight, that sort of thing. We've done them, every 2 or 3 years. We do the same thing over and over. But if I'm going to continue it on the Thursdays, I need to either find some people who are going to have to contribute topics, and I have to stop coming up with ones on my own because I don't necessarily know what it is you want to learn. So anybody is interested? How many people have actually been to one of the first Thursday? Yeah, maybe, well, more than half. If you want me to continue them, send me some ideas for what you want me to talk about. My email address is very easy to remember if you're a beer drinker, because my last name is Busch, just like the beer. My email address is dbusch@dbusch.com. And if you can remember that, you can send me an email, tell me a topic, and if I can come up with something new to talk about, and people actually want to come, more than 8 people, I'll continue doing it. Tonight we're going to do one of the topics that I had proposed to do, myths of photography that people believe that aren't really true. First of all, this little background on me, this is where I sort of come from in the 50s. These were my toys when I was a kid. I was sort of always like, technology. That's how I got into photography when I started. I discovered that if you took a piece of glass and a piece of photosensitive sandpaper, you could make a picture of a leaf. And I said, well, why wouldn't I just take my folks' 620 film negatives, put it on the paper, and make a picture that way? So I was actually making my first pictures when I was 8 years old 1950, 55, before I even had a camera. And then 57 is when I started taking pictures. I took a whole roll of pictures. Uh, Amazing camera, you press the shutter, it would take a picture. I got the roll back from the processor. I discovered that you had to wind the film in between shots. And I had a whole roll of double exposures, and a light went off in my head. And I thought, wait a second. And so my second roll of pictures was my brother playing baseball with himself. I put the camera on a tree stump, took a picture of pitching the ball, and moved over to home plate. Then I wound the camera. So you're very fortunate these days in that the technology now takes care of everything for you. Back in those days, you had to know a lot of technical stuff that you don't have to know today. These are things that are, this is why my retirement fund is so low, is I invested early on in slide rule technology, plastic peanuts, the yellow pages, used to advertise in yellow pages, pay phones, that sort of thing. That's where all my retirement funds went. And these are things that you no longer have anymore. Right? Who in the room knows what these are? Aha. Okay. I've been doing this so long that when I started in actually using a 35 millimeter camera in the early 60s, Kodachrome had an ASA of 10. And Tri-X was 200. And a few years later, they introduced Kodachrome 2, which was the ASA of 25. Tri-X suddenly became 400. 1970, I moved to Rochester, New York, and my biggest client for the PR agency where I worked was Eastman Kodak Company. So I got to go to the Kodak office every day and talk to people. So I meet with the scientists at Kodak Research Labs. I said, how did you get from Kodachrome to Kodachrome 2 with, remember, from ASA 10 to ASA 25? It's simple. We moved the goalposts. They changed how they calculated the ASA in 1963, 64, so that the formula was a little bit different, but that's how it went. We had to know this stuff back then because we would develop our own film. There's a lot of the people in this room who know these things are. Who could tell me? You didn't know there was going to be a quiz, but who could tell me why you had 3 thermometers? Yeah, but why did you have 3? Because if you were developing especially color film, you take the temperature, and it had to be a certain temperature, and you take the temperature with 3 thermometers, and if they didn't all agree, you would take the 2 that did agree and use that temperature. So I developed, back in the 60s, I developed color film and made color prints, and you had to have 3 thermometers to do that. There are people in this room who can tell you when you would use D76. I'd say, how would you use D76? And somebody will say, well, I dilute it 1 to 1 and add a little bit of sulfide if I wanted to boost the Tri-X to 800 from 400. There are people that would say, if Coleman was here, if I said, Coleman, why would you use Microdol X? And he'd say, well, if you wanted finer grain. And then there's people right here now, if I said, well, when would you develop film in Dectol? And they'd laugh. Why would you laugh if I said to develop film in Dectol? Because that's a print developer, that sort of thing. You had to know all this stuff. Back when I started, you would shoot sports pictures with flash. I met Bobby Kennedy in Indianapolis in 1968 and took his picture for a newspaper. And it was black and white. We would take the film and we'd throw it, it's a newspaper, we'd throw it in the Actifine for 15, 20 minutes, whatever, we didn't care. And we develop it and we get overexposed pictures. Well, today, the cameras take care of everything automatically. You don't have to know as much to get good exposure. But there's still a lot of things that it's useful to know the background. And I've sort of made it my life's work. Before I go, to dispel some of these myths, because there's still, even though the cameras take care of a lot of things for you, it's still useful to know the actual facts. For example, this is one of the most common ones. I've seen this taught in classes, where it says your exposure meter is calculated, it was calibrated to 18% gray. No, it's not. But I've seen it taught in classes. Supposedly, you take a reading off a Kodak, a gray card, or a mid-tone, something that's equivalent of gray, and you'll get the correct exposure. This is middle. The confusion over is the term middle gray. You know, middle gray, 50%. No, that's the actual midpoint between, you know, black and white. But that's not what photography uses. Gray card is 18% gray. That's right there. Your camera is actually calibrated to like 12 to 14% gray, and that's what they used to use as a standard. When you used a gray card, they used to tell you to take the reading off the gray card, but don't use it. Adjust from that. Kodak film used to come with this little leaflet, and it would tell you right on it. If you use a gray card, take the gray card reading, and then adjust for that. This you don't have to see that. That's just a reproduction of what it says on the gray card, on the instruction sheet. An 18% gray card is darker than what your camera is calibrated for. So when you make a reading off of that, it will tell you to decrease the exposure because it wants to make it darker. So, but what you should actually do, you take a gray card, you increase it half stop. If it's a light subject, you could just use the gray card reading. Very light subjects decrease by half a stop, and for dark subjects, increase by 1/2 to 1 to 1.5 stops. The reason why it isn't critical is your camera now, with the mirrorless cameras, you can see what you took, and with DSLRs as well, with digital cameras, you can see what you took beforehand, and you can judge whether your exposure was wrong or right, and then adjust. Now, you can't judge from the LCD image. The LCD image doesn't really give you a good picture of what your exposure is. You have to use a histogram. I'll get into histograms later. But it's still important to know if you're doing critical work, if you're in the studio and you're doing lighting ratios and you want your exposure for the shadows to be half of what the highlights are, or more dramatic, you need to know how to adjust using your meter reading. This is an example of what happens if you meter, off a gray card. If you point it at the meter at the gray patch, you'll get a slightly overexposed image because the camera tries to make it equal to that gray. If you point it at the black patch instead, it'll say, oh, I want to make this gray, and you get an overexposed image. Point it at the white one, it'll make the white patch gray, and you get it underexposed. If you want to, the problem is the camera is doing reflected light. The sun comes off your subject, goes into the camera, the exposure meter, and the camera has no idea what your subject is. You could be shooting a very dark subject, very light subject. The camera doesn't know. So it has to just sort of figure it out. And if you really want the most accurate exposure, use a handheld incident meter, which measures the light that's actually falling on your subject, not reflected. It takes into account the actual amount of light rather than just how much your dark or your light subject reflects. If you don't have a gray card and you want to get an accurate exposure, one trick is to take the palm of your hand. Doesn't matter what your race is, the palm of your hand is pretty much the same darkness. So you just meter off the palm of your hand, open up one stop, and that's equivalent of using an incident meter or a gray card. So if you're really critical about exposure, that's it. So that's the first myth that I wanted to get rid of. That people continue to say, well, you're calibrated for 18% gray. That's not true. Another thing I've heard, they say matrix metering is averaging. That's actually matrix metering. I've heard it in classes here at the club. Matrix metering is not averaging. It's the opposite of averaging. Averaging is when you take, all these little exposure zones and you add them up, and divide by however many they are and average them. So you have some light spots here and some very light spots here and some dark spots, and you come up with an average exposure. That's how the early metering cameras in the 60s measured, but today they're smarter. What matrix metering does is it checks out and it analyzes all the different areas. It'll say, this is a dark area, this is a light area, and then it uses a database of 32,767 different scenes that Kodak collected 30 or 40 years ago. And it says, aha, this is sky, because a zillion of my pictures, this kind of blue in this light area is sky. This is water, this is rocks, these are trees because they're green. And then the camera intelligently knows what kind of subject you have and can make a much more intelligent choice of how to choose exposure. With this picture, sky, person, that sort of thing. The silhouette shot, and so it knows. So if you use it, I use matrix metering almost all the time because the camera is really smart enough these days. And with the mirrorless cameras, you measure exposure from the sensor is actually seeing the exact thing that the DSLRs had an exposure meter that measured off of the ground glass or something like that. Another myth that I get all the time is, well, I have this lens that's at f2.8, that lens is at f2.8. They're going to provide the same exposure. That's not true. You can have one lens at f2.8, another lens at f2.8, take the same scene, and one will be a little darker, and the other will be a little lighter. The reason for that is that an f-stop does not have anything to do with how much light is received by the sensor. F-stops don't measure the amount of light transmitted to the lens. F-stops are just the focal length of the lens divided by the diameter of the opening. It takes nothing into account about how much light is lost in the lens itself. Depending on the design, you may lose a half a stop or a full stop of light that the lens going through. That's why they have T-stops. T-stops measure the actual transmission. You use T-stops in motion picture production because if they're shooting a scene and are using a 35 millimeter lens and then they switch to a telephoto lens, they want the scene to have the exact same brightness. And they can't say, set it at f2.8 so we'll get the same exposure. They have to set it for the T-stop, and those lenses are calibrated. That's important to know if you're doing like macro photography or other things where the exposure is critical. As the lens gets farther away because you're focusing closer from the sensor, you're losing light. So your f2.8 may actually give you as much light as f5.6. So that's another myth. Another myth, you get your best image quality at your sensor's base ISO, say ISO 100. When you get your camera, they'll say, well, the lowest ISO or the base ISO is 100, sometimes it's 200. And as you start to increase the ISO, you'll get better results when you boost, from 100 to 800 to 3200 or 6400. Modern sensors have 2 base ISOs. They don't have just one. And if you want to know, you'll have to find out what your camera's 2 base ISOs are. This is one for the Nikon Z9. Its lowest base ISO is, you don't have to know all this graph stuff. This is just showing you how to find out what it is. The lowest is 50. And you'll see this chart shows dynamic range. How many details you can capture. it starts to go down as you increase the ISO. It goes down till you get to 400. Then the camera has a second base ISO of 800 where it goes up again. And what they do is they amplify the image without adding noise, so you get better results. So you'll actually get better images at ISO 800 than you would at 400. So why is that important? If you're say, well, I need a better ISO, but I want the least amount of noise, and you're set at ISO 400 or ISO 640, no, jump to 800 and you'll get even better. So you can go to the website is Photons to Photos, and they have every single camera listed. And you can go there and all you do is look for the dip, and that'll tell you what your particular camera's two base ISOs are. For a lot of cameras, their second ISO, like 800, in the case of the E9, is so good that I leave mine at ISO 800 all the time. If I'm not outdoors in bright sunlight, you can't tell the difference between ISO 800 and ISO 100 or here this, about ISO, 100. You can't tell the difference. So leave it all the time. That's useful. You don't have to worry about this chart. Just find out what they are and know for the fact that you've got to, and then start using it, and you'll start getting better results. I should say histogram will help you achieve the best exposure and contrast. Well, actually, that's true. Problem is people don't know how to use histograms. There's two problems with histograms. First of all, histograms aren't linear, which I'll get into later. And the second thing is histograms lie to you. They're not really lying on purpose. It's because people don't know how to interpret them. And it's really simple to learn how to interpret a histogram. Because, like I said, when you look at the LCD or the viewfinder, you really can't tell the exposure or the contrast very well, because the LCD doesn't reproduce exactly or even close to the color temperature or the exposure of what your final image is going to be like. You can't even tell when you import it into, say, Lightroom. Lightroom will first load the JPEG image, even if you're shooting RAW, and then it'll switch to the RAW image later for you to manipulate. So if you really want to, tailor your exposure, learn how to use the histogram. For example, you look at this histogram and you say, well, what is it telling me? This particular histogram only tells you about contrast. And you look at the histogram, and these are all actually basically sort of similar, the same scene, but in this case, all the tones are spread from one side to the other. So this is a properly exposed image. If you see it like this, where the curves are very similar, but they're all compressed. If you see it like that, that means it's a low contrast image. Not really telling you everything that you need to know about exposure, but it does tell you that your contrast is too low. This one is spread out, and you're actually losing some. All this part from here to the left has been cut off. A lot of this is cut off. So you're losing a lot of whites at this end, a lot of the blacks at this end. So if you learn to use histograms to judge your contrast, then you can compensate. How do you compensate for contrast? You may have to change the lighting, use fill flash, use a fill light if you're outdoors, a reflector, something like that. That's one thing you can do with histograms. The other thing you can do with histograms is judge exposure. The curves are more or less the same, but this one's underexposed. You're losing the detail in the black. Nothing's being recorded in the highlights. There's empty spaces here. This is a properly exposed image, at least as close as you can get. There's nothing cut off at the whites, nothing cut off at the black. And here's one where it's you're losing whites, not recording any of the blacks. So you need to take the time to learn what you're looking at when you see your histogram. that's your only way to really adjust your exposure. This is just you can Google and find something like this where they'll show you examples of how to use histograms. One recommendation is exposed to the right, that you can adjust in your Photoshop. Another thing that people don't understand is they think histograms are linear, and they're not. They look at this and they think, well, I want to, there's 5 sections here. 20% of my tones are here, 20% are here, 20% are here, 20%. That's not how it works. With a sensor, half the tones that you capture are here in the highlights, which is a good thing. And then another 1/4, so that's 3/4 of the total, is captured from here to the right. That's good. By the time you get down to the darks, only 1/32 are captured. So when you're exposing to the right, you're moving more of these tones over into this section that you can capture, and you don't care about the darks because you're losing them. You didn't have many of them in the first place. So it just takes a little bit of practice and just remembering that your highlights are the most important things. That's where most of the tones are captured. That's where you should concentrate your attention with histogram. And it's not linear. And this axis going up and down is meaningless. It adjusts it depending on how many. These are the number of pixels of each tone, and it will adjust that axis. This is constant. Histogram will not help you in the fact that when you're doing color, there's 3 histograms, one for each color, and red tends to blow out. So when you're shooting roses, the image can be properly exposed, but your reds will be overexposed. Your cameras will all have a red, blue, and green histogram that you can look at, and if you're shooting a rose, you're going to find that this is going to look very different. So you may need to underexpose so that you capture a little bit more. This one's sort of a personal one to me. I moved in 1970 up to Rochester, New York. I took photography in college, but I really got my education in photography when I went to Kodak. Went to do work for Kodak, because I got to talk to the experts. And so people are always saying, well, Kodak missed the boat on digital photography, because the Kodak that we knew back then is no more. I went up recently, and a lot of the places that I went are just gone. When I lived in Rochester, 50,000 employees, Kodak lived in Rochester, and every one of them thought they were a photographer. They were all doing weddings on the side. But there were 50,000 employees in Rochester, New York, working for Kodak, and many millions, worldwide. Today, Kodak may have 10,000 employees worldwide. They're gone. Kodak didn't really miss the boat on digital photography. They abandoned the ship. The fact of the matter is, Kodak more or less invented digital photography. This building here is where I used to go every day, every morning. I'd go meet my clients. This is Kodak office, 343 State Street. Huge office buildings. A lot of people worked at Kodak Park and the Kodak Research Labs, but there were 20,000 people here. This is Kodak Tower. President was up, I never got up above the 12th floor. But today, if you go there, these are all sublet to other companies. Kodak still has headquarters here, but they're like, one little small set. The thing is just Kodak Park, the film manufacturing part, they've torn down most of these buildings. Elm Grove is almost nothing. Kodak doesn't exist as it did. It's because digital photography took over, but it's not because Kodak didn't understand digital photography. Kodak actually invented the first image scanners in the 1950s. When I started work, we used to go out and do articles about people that had these big process cameras. If you wanted to do color for printing, you'd have these big cameras which are, 4 or 5 feet tall, and you'd take pictures and make color separation. In the 70s and 80s, it started to transition to electronic scanners. Kodak invented the first scanners in the 50s. Kodak invented the first digital camera. Guy I knew at Kodak, Steve Sasson, was fooling around, and he invented the digital camera. Its resolution was 128 by 128 pixels. Wasn't so great, and he came to them and he says, "Yeah, all the people want film," but they continued. Another guy that I interviewed, a guy named Rajinder Khosla, this was the early 80s, and he says, "We invented this new CCD chip that can capture 1,000,000 pixels." I said, "What are you going to call it?" He said, "Well, we decided we're going to call it a megapixel chip." Megapixel, that'll never catch on. And it did. They invented the Bayer array. Everybody calls it Bayer, but Bayer. 86, 87, I was working there, and they called me in, and they said, "We invented this new thing called color squeeze software, and it uses something that we got together with a bunch of people. We call ourselves the Joint Photographic Experts Group." How many people knows what JPEG stood for? Joint Photographic Experts Group, and we invented this color squeeze software, and it makes images really, really small. And I say, "Well, why do you want to do that?" He says, "Well, we're going to have digital cameras, and they're only going to be used by newspapers, and they're going to be at a news site, and they're going to want to be able to transmit their pictures to the office because they're doing the Olympics and they want to send it to New York City. And how are they going to get it? Well, they're going to use this modem, and they're going to transmit it. But the pictures take so many pixels. We invented this software that makes the picture so small, you can send it over a telephone line at 300 baud, and you can send a picture, a 1 megapixel picture, in only 10 minutes. And I said, "That's really great." So they invented that. Then they got together with Philips, and they invented something called, we call it write once, read only media. I said, "Oh yeah, film. You write once and you can read only." No. We call it optical disc. It's called CD-ROM, read-only memory. And I said, "Oh, yeah." So they invented that. Later on, they invented the first digital DSLR. They took a Nikon camera, they adapted it. They came out with the first digital DSLR. In the early 90s, they came out with the first consumer digital camera, the Apple QuickTake, which was actually manufactured by Chinon, which was a Kodak company. So all this stuff, all the digital photography that we're using today, Kodak invented it. So they didn't miss the boat. They just decided, well, we're going to keep on making film, and we're going to make money off of that. And we all know what happened. So I want to give Kodak credit for people say, well, they missed the boat. They didn't miss the boat. This is Steve Sasson. I took this. This is the first digital camera. He's retired. Oh, and it took like 10 minutes to load the picture. This is actually sort of related to what we're talking about. People believe that a 40 megapixel camera has 40 megapixels of resolution. The actual fact of it is there are certain 48 megapixel cameras that have 12 megapixel resolution of actual detail resolution. I'll explain it in a minute. This is an example. You're probably familiar with this. This is the Bayer color sensor array where it alternates red, green and red, and then the next row is blue and green pixels. Now the pixels themselves are only sensitive to white light, but they put filters on them so that they only will pass red or only green or only blue light. This happens to correspond to the way our rods and cones in our eyes function. If our rods and cones were sensitive to cyan, magenta, and yellow, we would use that kind of sensor. But our rods and cones are sensitive to red, green, and blue. So they have the reason there's twice as many green as red and blue as our eyes are twice as sensitive. So the Bayer array more or less duplicates what they are. But what you end up doing is, since each pixel only recognizes one color, is if the light from that particular photosite is not red and it falls on a red pixel, it doesn't see it at all. So they use what they call demosaicing, where the camera says, well, the one next to it was green, and this one, even though we don't see anything, is probably green and not blue. No, it's not red because it didn't register. So it's calculating. So your resolution to begin with is not 48, even if you have 48 megapixels of resolution, it's not 48 megapixels, it's 24 of green and 12 each of red and blue. So you lost, you're not 48 megapixels right there. This is Dr. Bryce Bayer, that's how he pronounced his name. While I was up in Rochester working with the scientists at Kodak Research Lab, 1974, while I was actually there, Isaac Newton once said that if I had seen farther than others, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. I haven't really seen farther than anybody, but what I did was I looked over the shoulders of the giant, because this guy was up in Rochester and he foresaw, well, they're going to have digital cameras. Well, how are we going to register all these colors? And this is an actual page from his notebook where he says, you know what? And then he diagrams out, you're looking at the page that he wrote, diagramming the Bayer array. He passed away in 2012, but it's sort of interesting that I was there while he's inventing digital photography. I have nothing to do with it, but I was there. But today, the most common cameras that claim to have 48 megapixels that actually have 12 are your phones. They have, this is just an example of a section of a phone, and there's some other cameras that would have it, their array. But what they do is they call them quad Bayer sensors. They combine 4, so that they're actually have only 12 megapixels of resolution, but if this were a different darkness, it would recognize it. So you can get a little bit of detail, lightness and darkness, but the colors you don't get. So your 48 megapixel camera or your 36 megapixel camera don't necessarily have 48 megapixels of resolution. Why is this important to you? If you really need 48 megapixels of resolution, you need to know, which your camera has, how it functions, find it out. Know you're being fooled. Another myth is, you'd always hear this, they say, well, we went from the early digital cameras, the first ones that I used were like, well, the first ones I used were the Nikon Coolpix were like 3. No, never mind. In the 90s, I had a Epson that only had a 1 megapixel. But when we started into the digital SLRs, they would have like 6 megapixels. Kodak Coolpix had 3.2. Anyway, we went from 6, then we went to 12, and then we went to 24. 24 megapixels was, the Nikon DX, D2X. 24 megapixels. Boy, nobody would ever need more than 24 megapixels. But they said, well, the problem with that, to get on a sensor to get 24 megapixels instead of 12, you had to make the pixels really tiny. And the tinier pictures, the less light they could gather. And so the smaller pixels, more noise, less dynamic range. And so that's common today. You think, well, I don't want a higher megapixel camera because it won't be more noise, less dynamic range. Not true anymore. Now they have a backside illuminated sensor. The original sensors, this purple part, the magenta part, that's the photosite that was capturing the image. And it was in this little tiny well buried in the middle of the sensor as the light came in. So the light had to come in, and only the light that went down this little tiny well, they'd have to put a little lens on top to focus it. All this other light went to waste. But then they switched, and then the photodiodes were down here. So they switched to backside illuminated sensors. They moved the photodiodes up here, so the whole entire surface within limits can now be exposed to light. So the modern cameras can efficiently use all of the light, almost all of the light that lands on the sensor, and it doesn't have to come in as quite as sharp of an angle. The result is a 24 megapixel camera with the old type of sensor may have worse light sensitivity than a 50 megapixel camera today. So you can forget all that. Don't fear high megapixels. They keep improving this all the time. So high megapixels don't necessarily mean worse dynamic. I see this one a lot. I saw this, a professional photography group. I was on a Zoom presentation with them. And the guy has a master's of photography from the PPMA. And he says, well, when you're doing image competitions, submit your digital files at 300 DPI rather than 72 DPI. You want the higher resolution. DPI has nothing to do with the resolution. That's an instruction to the printer. The printers use dots. It tells the printer how big to make the image. A digital file this is a myth. They say a digital file at 300 DPI has more resolution than those at 72 DPI. I still see this. If you're not going to make a print, you don't care. I did a screenshot from Photoshop just before I went in. Took an image, 600 by 400 pixels, 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. Here it is at 72 pixels per inch. And then I changed it to 300. Look, it's still 6,000 by 4,000. The only change is the printing instruction. At 72 DPI, this would have printed at 83 inches by 55 inches. You change it to 300, it prints at 20 by 13 inches. And you really don't have to worry about it because the printers all have what they call a raster image processor. It just takes your image and it calculates what the printer needs to print it out. So, so next time they say, well, if you submit, please submit your images at 300 DPI. You can be a wise aleck and say, you can argue with them, or you can just or do what they want, submit it at what they want. It's not going to make any difference. When you're starting out in photography, first thing you'll hear is well, you're going to shoot action pictures. You need a fast shutter speed. It's a little more subtle than that. I've been taking action pictures. Well, because I started in '61, I started shooting high school basketball, 35 millimeter camera, and I would shoot in those days Tri-X at 400, 125ths at f2.8 in your average gymnasium, and that was the fastest shutter speed I could get until we started pushing film. Always wanted to get fast shutter speed. Then I grew up and I discovered you don't always want to have fast shutter. Sometimes you do. This one is an overexposed action shot. The ball is frozen on the ground. I guess it wouldn't help much if it was blurry, but in this particular picture, it's probably all right that everything is frozen. The guy's getting ready to fall. It makes it sort of an interesting picture. This one I shot, and the shutter speed did freeze it, and it's sort of iffy. It's the wheels are not spinning. Actually, they weren't spinning. I don't think. I don't know much about motocross, but anyway, it froze them. Maybe if I'd used a slower shutter speed and they were spinning, and these would have been a little blurry, it would have been a better picture. But I definitely wanted a fast enough shutter speed, at least for this picture, that he wasn't blurry. So yeah, for this one, I wanted a fast shutter speed, and this is the shutter speed I chose. For this one, a fast shutter speed, a no-no. this helicopter is about to crash. The rotors are not moving. For aircraft especially, you want to shoot, and you may have to experiment because, I don't know, I've got some pilots in the room. I assume the propellers and rotors move at different speeds, some faster than others, maybe not. But you have to choose a shutter speed that's going to freeze the aircraft that allow the rotors to blur enough so that it doesn't look like it's crashing. Also, you have pictures in which the blur becomes an element of the picture. I don't remember what shutter speed I shot this with, but it was a fairly low shutter speed, and I panned. And if this guy would have been frozen, he could have been a statue, In this case, you look at it, this isn't really a great picture either, but at least it has a sense of, that's the problem. I hate all my pictures. They say, what's your favorite picture? I don't have any favorite pictures. I take a picture and I look at it, I start finding things wrong, and I can tell you 12 things wrong with this picture. It's an action picture with blur. Another thing you see, and this is one of the most contentious things that you see on websites, where people say, you need a protective filter to save your lens in case you drop it, run into something. And then others will say, no, why put a filter in front of your lens? You paid $1,000 for a lens, and you're putting a $50 filter on the front. You're going to degrade your image quality. And the other people say, you can't tell the difference when there's a filter on. The other ones say, oh no, you don't know how to tell the difference. And so you get these big arguments. And my solution is, I use filters. I use filters when I want to filter something, and I use filters because I'm lazy. And I go through a lot of lenses because I buy a lot of lenses, and then I sell them with the cameras. And I like to sell my equipment in like new condition. And the pictures that I publish are like an inch big inside a little book, and nobody's going to tell if the filter degraded the image quality anyway. So I use filters as UV filters as lens caps. So you don't have to use a lens cap, use a UV filter. Your camera's all ready to take a picture. I have probably for 77 millimeter filters, I've got 20 of them. And when the filter gets dirty, I take it off, I put on a clean one. That's my lens cap. And when I get 6 or 7 dirty ones, I clean them. So yeah, I definitely use protective filters, but it's not to protect my lens, because filters do not protect your lens. Filters are designed to break. Steve Perry did some tests, and he tested the most expensive filters and the cheapest filters, and they all broke with ridiculously ease. He would drop ball bearings on them, and he found that filters would shatter at impacts that wouldn't even harm your lens at all. You drop a ball bearing on the lenses, and they have hard coatings, nothing will happen. In most cases, I'm not recommending you drop ball bearings on your lenses, but nothing will happen. But the filters will break. Of course, when the filter breaks, then you got all these little glass shards in there, which just may scratch your lens. Filters are designed to break so that they can sell more filters. A filter is wonderful if you're out shooting in wet weather, salt water, sand, that sort of thing. I use them for that too, but they don't protect your lens from the most common type of damage. Steve Perry dropped these ball bearings, nothing happened. He dropped the lenses from various heights. He went out and bought a bunch of lenses that were imperfect for some reason. Maybe the autofocus didn't work, or maybe something else didn't work. And he dropped them from different heights. And he discovered what would happen. Well, in almost no cases, it's hard. It has to drop on something large. Did he get damage from the lens element from falling? But the filters broke. And you'll always see people say, oh, I dropped my lens and the filter crashed and it saved my lens. No, it ruined your filter. That's what it happened. He says, if you drop your lens, what's going to happen? It's not necessarily going to happen, but the most likely damage is your autofocus system is going to be broke, or your image stabilization system is going to be broke. That's what's going to happen. A filter is not going to help much. So there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people who are so clumsy that they probably need a filter, not because it helped them, but because they think, well, at least I did everything I possibly could. And then you got people who, you know, they're not clumsy, so they don't use filters, or they do use filters. It's not going to make any difference. But if you want to use a filter, go ahead. If you think that the filter is not going to degrade your image, you probably can't tell the difference anyway. There's a class of people called pixel peepers that blow things up, and you know, and they say, oh no, I could see this and I could see that. And there's a famous photographer, I forget his name, very famous in the 50s, and people would send him, it wasn't Ansel Adams, it was somebody else. And people would send him lenses all the time, and he would test them, and if he liked it, he would keep the lens. If he didn't like it, he'd send it back. I don't want this lens. And then come to him, and they said, you know, sir, you're one of the great masters of photography. What tests do you do to tell me, you know, what qualities of this lens she said to keep this lens and get rid of that lens. And he says, I take pictures, and if I like the pictures I took, I keep the lens. If I don't like the pictures, I give it back. And that's all he did. So, pixel peepers, you know, they will continue to peep pixel forever. The other thing that's contentious, it's less so than it used to be, but you know, don't put all your eggs in one basket. There used to be a thing where people would say, don't use big memory cards. If you know, you're at risk of losing, you know, more images with a big memory card than you are with a small memory card. This dates back to before they had memory cards. I can remember when I got a 200 megabyte hard disk, and I was replacing an 80 megabyte hard, not gigabyte, megabyte hard disk. And I paid like $900 for a 200 megabyte hard disk. And oh, don't do that. You know, you're going to lose more stuff if your hard disk runs. And it carried over when it started on memory cards. I said, oh no, don't get a 16 gigabyte. I actually started with megabyte memory, but don't get a 16 gigabyte memory card. Get an 8 gigabyte memory. You lose one. First of all, most people don't fill up their memory cards. If I have right now in my Z9, I've got two 512 gigabyte memory cards. I almost never have more than say 64 gigabytes of images on any of them. So it wouldn't make any difference whether I had a 512 or a 64 gigabyte memory card in them. You're only at risk when you start to fill up the card, and most people don't do this. Back in the film days, we'd have people that, when we worked at the camera store, would come in and we developed their pictures, and they had Christmas, Valentine's Day, and Easter pictures all on the same 36 exposure roll. People don't do that. Some people do, but there are people that buy, I find it's amazing, they'll buy an interchangeable lens camera, because I get them to come, you know, I got your book, this part about interchangeable lens. I bought my camera and I bought the kit lens, and I've never bought another lens. You know, and I've never bought another memory card. This one isn't full yet. But most of the people in this room aren't like that. You take your memory cards out and you'll transfer to your computer. In my case, with my 512, I always open a new folder, and I keep them for a while, because I'll be off at I was at a concert last night. I says, oh, this is other concert that I shot last month, and I could show people the pictures, but they're backed up on my computer, so I don't care. Second of all, if you use small memory cards, you're doubling your chance. If you use two memory cards, you're doubling your chances of losing one. I don't know, if you're like me, I have put my memory cards through the washing machine. They work. I have actually folded a memory card. I took an SD card and put it in my wallet, and then folded the wallet, and I folded the memory card. You know, so the more memory cards you have, the more chances you are. These days, the memory cards are good enough. You don't have to worry. So I think this myth is probably dispelled. I don't know if there's anybody here who's afraid of using large memory cards, but I'm here to say, you know, get the largest one you can afford. Don't get the largest, get the fastest one you can afford. That's more important than largest, especially if you're shooting video. And get one, if you're shooting video, get the one that doesn't overheat. because if you're shooting 4K video, a lot of memory cards will get hot, you'll burn your hand. It actually says it right here, hot card, careful of that. So those are the more, you look for heat and speed more than size. We were talking about this one earlier tonight. This also had people back, 10, 15 years ago, the digital cameras, the interchangeable lens cameras were all APS-C, so-called crop sensor cameras. And the people started getting full frame digital cameras. And they noticed when you put a full frame lens on an APS-C camera, it multiplies your lens's focal length by 1.5. So instead of a 400 millimeter f5.6 lens, you've got a 600 millimeter f5.6 lens. They call it the lens multiplier. And that's sort of a dangerous concept because you're not multiplying anything. And I think everybody here probably knows that by now. All you're doing is cropping. And you can take exactly the same picture and just crop it in Photoshop, and you get the same number of pixels, same image. Why would you want to use the crop, like if you have a full frame camera, and can you set it to the crop mode? Why would you want to do that? Well, there's reasons for that. If you got like a Nikon high resolution camera, like a Nikon Z9, the cropped version is still 20 megapixels. That's useful. And if you're a sports photographer or a wedding photographer, and you're shooting a whole bunch of, if you're a sports photographer in particular, you're shooting a football game, and you're shooting, you want to get that multiplier effect. You don't want to have to go through and crop every single picture. And the mirrorless cameras, the DSLRs, would they put a little mask in your viewfinder so you'd know. That was useful in sports because you could see when a running back was running into your field of view, and then he'd enter the crop section and then you'd frame it. Now the mirrorless cameras will enlarge it so you don't see the outside part. So you lost that capability, but you're framing it, and you don't have to go through and crop a manually. So if you have a high resolution camera, you might want to use the crop factor. It doesn't multiply your lens focal length, but it does give you a automatic crop. That's all it does. This is another thing that went away with mirrorless cameras. You see, especially the pixel peepers. They say, well, I got my new camera, I got my new lens, and now I'm going to calibrate it because I want to correct for front focus or back focus. This is the correct plane of focus, but my camera focuses here. Or maybe my camera focuses here. So they go through, and the cameras have a facility for adjusting the focus. So when the camera thinks it's in focus, it actually moves it forward or backward to adjust for front or back focus. That was useful with DSLRs because the DSLR, the focus mechanism was on the floor of the mirror box. The light would come through, it would bounce off the mirror, partially silvered mirror. Some of it would go down to the floor where the autofocus mechanism was. Now, if the mirror was out of alignment, if the autofocus mechanism in the bottom of the camera was out of alignment, and then your ground glass that you were looking at was out of alignment, what you saw in the ground glass might be very different from what the camera was focusing on. So you'd need to adjust for that. On a mirrorless camera, that all goes away. You're focusing using the exact sensor that the autofocus system is using. And so technically, it's impossible for a mirrorless camera to need calibration. However, it's still, the camera has, with image stabilization, the carriage moves, and it can be just a little bit off. You might need it, but it's so rare that I've never known anybody who's actually needed to calibrate lenses for a mirrorless camera. If it's necessary at all, it's because you're using a a digital SLR lens with an adapter, and the adapter may have some issues where it shifts, and the lens may have some mount issues. But it's a myth. You can, don't worry about lens calibration. Here's another one. There's people that we used to brag in the old days. Maybe people still brag. But I can handhold a sharp image at a 30th of a second. Oh no, wait, I can handhold a sharp image at a 15th of a second. Me, I have to use 125th. I've got a problem. What they're really saying is they don't know how to tell the difference between a blurry image and a sharp image. And now it's less important now because when we have image stabilization built into like that. There's even a rule of thumb that's a myth. So use the reciprocal of the lens focal length. So use a 500th of a second with a 500 millimeter lens. And that goes out the window because some lenses have image stabilization, the cameras have image stabilization. So you don't really know. And rule of thumbs are, rule of thumbs. If you want to know for a fact whether you can handhold at the 30th of a second, I'm going to show you. You take a pie plate and you paint it black or maybe not. You punch a bunch of pinholes in it and you go set it up on a firm support and you backlight it and you do it in a dark room and you take pictures at a 500th of a second, 60th of a second, and a 30th of a second, and a 15th of a second or a quarter of a second. And then you look at your results and you'll know instantly, and it will vary by lens. Wide angle lens, you get less magnification. So you take a lens that you want to know how you do, and you can do it, and you'll know instantly, or at least if you're consistent the way you hold it. There's certain ways to hold it, they teach that. Certain ways to hold cameras so you get steady. So, and if you look, it not only tells you that you're shaky, it tells you how you're doing it. My wife, who takes better pictures than I do because she knows nothing about photography, when I send her off for take pictures for me when she travels all over the world, I set the camera to do bracketed exposures. And she tends to, when she takes a picture, she sort of punches the shutter button like this, so the camera rotates slightly. And the last picture is always, or the middle picture is always the sharpest one because the camera's stabilized from the movement. And I learned this from having her take some pictures. Oh, you're jerking the camera this way. So she didn't really need the bracketing other than because the camera took fairly good exposures and you can adjust for it. But I do the bracketing so that she's got 3 shots. The middle one cancels out her shaking. You can do the same thing, if you don't want to bracket. You can when I'm shooting a concert, I shoot concert at like 180th to 200th of a second most of the time. And last night I shot a violin player, so I shot some at a 15th of a second to get the bow blurry, that sort of thing. And the middle I shoot continuous, 4 frames a second, and the middle ones are always even. I don't want to say even eye as if I'm wonderful, but I'm not that great. So the middle ones will be a little bit sharper than the other ones. So, but this is how you tell. And then you can go and say, yes, I can handhold at a 15th of a second. This is my shot at a 15th of a second. And I'll believe you, but you're going to have to show me that shot. I get this, I write books, you may know that. And I hear people say, well, I don't like books because I'm a photographer. I'm a visual learner. So I like YouTube videos so I can learn visually. And I shouldn't really be talking about this because the difference between visual learning and auditory learning and all that, it's a scientific thing. I've read some things about it. And what I'm about to say is not 100% accurate. But to these people that say they don't want to read a book because they're visual learners, I say, go to YouTube and get a how-to video and turn off the audio so that you're watching visually. This is Jared Polin, and he did this nice extensive video. These are shots from a single video where he told you how to get a certain wide angle lens effect. And you watch that video with the audio turned off and tell me how much you learned visually. He had all kinds of information. And so I say, well, actually you're an audio learner, which is looking at YouTube video with some visual accessories, visual aids. You may be a visual learner. Like I said, the scientific things, some people are visual learners, some people are more auditory learners. But for heaven's sakes, when you're reading a book, what are you using? Your eyes? What could be more visual than that? Buy books, don't go to YouTube. The other thing I don't like about YouTube is because sometimes I wonder how to do that. And so you get a YouTube video. You got to watch an 8-minute video to get to the part where you want to know. With one of my books, you go to the index, back button focus, 343. You go to page 343, and it tells you how to do back button focus. You don't have to watch a 10-minute video. You can learn it in 3 seconds. And plus, a lot of people, they'll buy one of my books, and maybe they'll read it all the way through. Maybe they won't. Depends on their skill level. A lot of them are just used for reference. They buy the book, they read the first couple chapters so they know where all the controls are. And then they never read the rest of the book, but they want to know how to do one thing. They go and they find out how to use it. It's a lot more efficient than finding a lousy YouTube video and having to figure out. And then the person may have it wrong, so you got to watch. I may have it wrong too, but at least I have 1,000 people writing in saying it's wrong. It is calibrated to 18% gray, and then I said, no, I'm not. You're not. So anyway, so you can go ahead and say you're a photographer, you're a visual learner, but don't say it's because you do YouTube. I put just a bunch of the minor ones near the end of this. One is it polarizer filters black glare. That's not exactly wrong, but it's not exactly right either. This is how polarizers work. It filters out lights, traveling at different angles. But polarizing filters only work with light that's already polarized. If the light isn't polarized, they don't do anything. Now, when you're outdoors shooting a lake or something like that, the light is polarized. The light bouncing off the sky and coming down from the sky is polarized. So it'll work with a polarizer. So the polarization, it increases color saturation, and it reduces reflections on non-metallic objects. So you're shooting a car, you got polarized light from the sky, it'll eliminate reflections from the windshield, but the bumper's still going to be, chrome bumper's still going to be, have reflections. Maybe it'll reduce it a little because there may be what a coating or something they put on the bumper that is. So just don't think, now you're indoors and the light isn't polarized, you use a polarizer, guess what? It's not going to work. So yes, polarizing do reduce glare, but it's not all glare. And how do you tell where? Well, you point with your finger like that. Some light source is right over there or over there, and the polarizer will work. If it's ahead of you, behind you, it won't work. That's a simple way to figure out how well your polarization is. There's a whole thing, I do a presentation on polarizers. Because you got the problem with a wide angle lens is the polarization will differ across the part of the sky because the light is coming from different angles. Manual focus lenses are inferior to autofocus lenses. First of all, you don't even need an autofocus lens for a lot of things like macro photography. I now have a autofocus macro lens, but for many years I used a Nikon macro lens I got in 1965 for my macro work because I don't want the camera to decide which pedal to focus on. I want to focus on, and the macro lenses I have now have image stabilization. Well, yeah, I can shoot without a tripod, but most of the time when I shoot macro things, it's on a tripod and I manually focus it. So why not use a manual focus lens? You could pick up a wonderful, wonderful manual focus macro lens for $50 from KEH.com. There's no need to spend, $1,000. And some of the best lenses, Zeiss makes a bunch of manual focus lenses that are sharper than anything that you're going to own. This may be the last one. I always ask how many people here shoot video, and it's usually nobody. So I don't do much video in the presentation, but there's this myth that if you shoot video and you want to shoot at high frame rates, like 120 frames per second, or fast shutter speed at 2/50th of a second, you get sharper video frames and sharper video images. You do that, and your video is going to look terrible, because the human eye, we're socially adjusted to seeing video with blur between frames. And if they're sharp, it's going to look jittery. And if you want to shoot and you actually see this in motion pictures sometimes, where they're doing a high-speed action shot, they'll shoot it at a high frame rate with high shutter speeds, and you can see the jitter, and they'll do it for special effect. And so I always tell people who are shooting video, you should never shoot at a shutter speed more than twice as fast as the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 30th of a second, no better than a 60th of a second. Shooting at 120 because you want to shoot slow motion, whatever. And if you're into French New Wave cinema, you'll know what this means. The end in French, and that's all I got. I'll take questions.
Okay, if you've got a question, please raise your hand so we can get a mic to you so people at home can hear.
Yeah, you were talking about T-stops earlier on the lenses.
Yeah.
Where can you find that information?
Well, the lenses that have T-stops are generally cinema lenses, and they will. You cannot find out what a T-stop is on your normal lenses because you can't get it, because the markings will be for f2.8. The camera will read f2.8, and the exposure system will compensate for it if it's not transmitting more or less light. It's just important to know that when you put a telephoto lens on, you're going to get less exposure at f2.8 than you would with a wide angle lens. So you need to be aware of that, not be surprised that, gee, I suddenly have to change my exposure by a third of a stop or half a stop. It's both at, I want to shoot at f8. Why do I have to now shoot at a 500th of a second instead of, whatever. So that's, it's just good to know, but not crucial.
James, did you have something?
Your one slide showed the sensor with the photodiodes, and I'm just curious what those are about, like how they're used. And
Is the sensor with, which picture was that?
one of your slides showed the sensor with individual cells on it with the colors and things like that.
Oh, the bioarray?
Yeah, at the bottom was a photo diode, a layer of photodiode, and I was just curious how that's used and what it's for, and because you always think of diode for electricity, that it.
Tell me when we get there. Past it? Yeah. Well, that's just a photodiode. Oh, photodiode. Diode is the semiconductor that captures the light. Every camera has a 48 megapixel camera. Will have 48 million of them, supposedly. Photodiode. That's what your sensors consist of. Yeah. Okay, all right.
Anybody else?
All right. In terms of our first Thursday of the month thing, who would come, except they don't come because it's on a Thursday and that's a school night. You just don't come because you don't want to. All right, that's good too. I'd still like, people to come up with, if you want me to keep doing these, coming up with, go back. A log way. Too bad it doesn't wrap around. Almost there. Oops. I don't know if you can even read those topics. If there's anything you'd like like I did Route 66. I did that probably 3 years ago. Because we can redo some of these. Because I learn everything. I think I learn new things all the time. So every time, like I've done the concert photography. I do some of these all over I've actually gone to various states and done some of these. I've done the concert one probably 7 or 8 times. And every time I do it, it's new because I take more pictures and I learn new tricks and things. So the popular one we did was cheap travel photography. I showed people how to travel to Europe for $400. The one in December was, people have already come up to me and say they enjoyed it. I said, well, you weren't one of the 8 people that was here. Oh, yeah. I'm going to do that. We're going to Sicily in March, and I've got a very small backpack, and I'm going to take just that. Yeah. Oh, she won't do that. That's why I did the cheap travel photography ones. 'Cause I took actually probably very little in that was anything I did. I knew they were all things I picked up from her, because she was very ill several times, and I told her, well, if you do this chemotherapy, even though you don't want to, you can do anything you want. So she did, and I said, what do you want? She said, I want to retire and travel the world. And so that's what she's been doing. She just got back from Canada, and she does things like she went to, in December, she went to Rome for a week, not to see the sightseeing. She just wanted to be in Rome for a week. And so she says, I've been to Rome like 10 times, I just want to be in Rome and walk around Rome, stuff like that. Be careful what you say. You get taken up. Done concerts, air shows. I used to do every couple of years. I used to do the air show before the Cleveland Air Show, Len's ball photography, anything like that. So if there's something you want to know about, I don't necessarily know about it, but I'll find out about it before I give the presentation. So let me know, and if people can come up with things to do, I'll do some more of the Thursday things. People who come, you can come. There are on YouTube. No, they're on our website. I don't want them on YouTube. All right, well, they're on the website. The reason they're not on YouTube is I charge money to do these other places, and not because I need the money. It's because I want people to appreciate it, and come here and do it for free. Nobody appreciates it. It's fine.
Yeah,
I get a lot more out of the club than the club gets out of me, believe me. So
for SIG meetings, you have to either be here in person or go through the member portal. So you
Yeah.
have to be a member or be here in person.
yeah, so they're not going to be on YouTube. Also, the presentations that are recorded here are not near. They're not the ones on YouTube are all very sophisticated. Most of them are very sophisticated. For mine, it's just you don't even see me, which is probably fortunate. But they're just recordings of what I'm saying now. So they go to YouTube and on a safari. Yeah. So I'd like to go on a safari. So take a picture of it with your phone. Or I don't know. Or we could post it somewhere. I don't know. Are you an astrophotographer? Y- Yeah, yeah, it was very, I asked if you were an astrophotographer because I've done a lot of astrophotography, but the people who know astrophotography really know astrophotography, so I don't want to make an idiot of myself. Um, I do that anyway, but anyway, uh, covered a lot of things. Covered, for example, with astrophotography, you're better off with a wide angle lens. And there's a ratio you can figure out for how long you can expose before you start to blur your star trails. So we covered star trails. We covered just all the different sky advice on, like there's a place, I forget where it is, near Cleveland here, where there's that dark sky that you can go to shooting. We covered that. Just a lot of different things. It was worth a whole presentation, but none of it was detailed enough to please an astrophotographer. Just like my bird photography ones. I do a lot of bird photography. Not pretty good at bird photography, but you get a birder in here and he'll say, was that a green heron or a night heron or a great blue heron? I'd say, well, it's a bird. You ask the guy over there with the binoculars and no camera. That person will know what kind of a bird it is. So we get a little more technical than your average once you get into it when you go to see some person talk at your public library. Nothing super technical. Just, this is for, we originally set this out. When we first started this, we said in order to come, you had to have either taken one of the camera club's courses or the equivalent, because we didn't want people coming saying, this f-stop thing, what is that? You know, we didn't want people doing that, but we relaxed that because we found that the people who didn't know what an f-stop is didn't want to come to any of these anyway. So,
Hey, Dave, just one idea I don't see up there. As the cameras become more and more sophisticated, there are so many autofocus modes. Used to be just dynamic autofocus. Now there's wide angles. Each brand of camera has their separate ones too. You could almost spend an evening talking about the different autofocus modes and when they might be best or not best or whatnot. So it's just throwing out an idea.
who would want to see something like that? You know, 'cause I ask that every time. I asked for the December topic, and we had a whole bunch of people raise their hands, and not one of them came. But odds are, of course, the topic was terrible anyway. But odds are, if a lot of people want to see something like that, I could consider doing that. So yeah, I'll put that on there. My list alphabetically. I was also thinking of doing one on tripods. Believe it or not, there's a lot of things. Well, there's a lot of different aspects to tripods that people don't think about. I just paid $800 for a tripod, and it's not my cheapest tripod. I probably got $3,000 in 3 tripods. So there's a reason for that. There's people that buy a tripod, they just want something to hold up their camera. And then you get, the worst thing you do, if you buy the tripod, it's got the little leg braces. The reason it's got the leg braces is because it has to have the leg braces, or else it's gonna, like that. So there's a whole bunch of different aspects to using a tripod. There's a whole bunch of different tricks to using a tripod. I would think of doing one on tripod. Tom Hogan has this thing where he says, you really need to spend $500 or $600 on a tripod and a ball head. You're going to spend $500 or $600 on a tripod and ball head, but you're either going to buy one tripod and ball head for $500 that's really good, or you're going to buy a $100 tripod, then you're going to buy a $200 tripod, then you're going to buy a $300 tripod, and you're going to spend $500 or $600 to finally get one. It's not even as good as the one that you would have bought in the first place. So There's a lot, anybody interested in tripod? No, okay. It's good to know. What, monopods? Yeah. But still nobody wants it, so we won't do that. All right. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thanks, Dave. You're such an asset to the club. We appreciate you coming in. Our lens
two
winners,
syllable
don't
lenses.
forget to come up here and pick his brain on those older lenses. Again, the website for people to send in ideas for the SIG meeting.
Just send it to my email at dbush
dbush
at dbush.com.
at dbush.com. All right, thank you. Guys, enjoy the rest of the evening.